Chapter 1. The Static of Discontent. The rain in Viridia was a consistent, melancholic drizzle, the kind that seemed to seep into the very bones of the city. It reflected, perhaps with unsettling accuracy, the mood in Silas Grind, the coffee shop Alex called home. The air hung thick, with the aroma of burnt espresso, and the low murmur of ambitions, mostly unfulfilled, blending with the rhythmic clatter of the espresso machine and the insistent tapping of keyboards. It wasn't a vibrant place, not in the way the new money, the incubator clique as Sebastian so condescendingly termed them, envisioned. It was a place of quiet desperation, a holding pattern for those who'd chased the future with a raw, inefficient zeal. Alex Sterling, or rather, Alex as he deliberately presented himself, sat hunched over a battered olive-green laptop, the glow of its antiquated screen a defiant flicker in the dim light. The machine, a 28 MacBook Pro, was a ridiculous anachronism in this room, a monument to a time when innovation hadn't been distilled into a digestible, algorithm-driven. He was debugging a simple mapping application, a ghost of a project he'd been tinkering with for months, a project that, frankly, wouldn't have registered a blip on Sebastian's carefully curated timeline. He wasn't particularly good at the coding anymore. The years spent in the shadows, meticulously cultivating an identity of deliberate obscurity, had dulled the sharp edges of his technical skill. It was more a habit now, a way to occupy his mind, a controlled burn against the overwhelming tide of his inherited reality. The source of the irritation wasn't the code itself, though it was undoubtedly frustrating. It was the relentless, simmering resentment that radiated from Sebastian Thorne. Thorne, founder of Novaspark, a fledgling tech incubator, occupied the corner booth with an air of self-importance that bordered on the obnoxious. He was a creature sculpted from polished ambition and fueled by the potent cocktail of youthful arrogance and recently acquired capital. Novaspark had secured a minor series of funding around a splash of iridescent color in the dull landscape of Viridia startups, and Thorne treated Silas Grind like his personal office, barking orders and dispensing thinly veiled condescension with equal measure. "Seriously, Alex," Thorne drawled, swirling the foam of his Americano with exaggerated disdain. "Still wrestling with Gyoisen? You'd think a developer would at least be familiar with the basics." He punctuated the statement with a theatrical sigh, loud enough to attract the attention of a nearby patron, a young woman meticulously sketching in a notebook, her face an expression of focused concentration. Alex ignored him. Had learned a long time ago that engaging Thorne was a fool's errand. Every interaction was a calculated act of provocation, a carefully orchestrated opportunity to belittle him, to reinforce his position at the apex of this petty hierarchy. "It's a perfectly functional mapping application," Alex replied, his voice deliberately neutral, conserving his energy. He adjusted his worn jeans, the fabric feeling rough against his skin. The oversized hoodie, a deliberate shield against both the rain and the judging eyes of the city, felt equally uncomfortable. The barista, Elara, a young woman with a startlingly perceptive gaze and a talent for crafting intricate latte art, brought him another coffee. This time, a black, strong brew. "Rough day, Alex?" she asked, her voice quiet, laced with a genuine concern he rarely elicited. "Just debugging," he said, taking a slow sip. He appreciated Elara's kindness, the small, unspoken acknowledgement of his quiet struggle. She saw something in him that the others, Thorne, especially, refused to see: a certain dignity, an unyielding core beneath the layers of carefully constructed anonymity. "Success isn't about how much noise you make," she offered, her eyes fixed on the rain-streaked window. It was a surprisingly profound observation, one that resonated with a part of him head long suppressed. Just then, Thorne let out a booming laugh, directed specifically at Alex. "The dinosaur!" he shouted, drawing attention from several patrons. "Seriously, Alex, trying to build the future with the machine that launched in 2008? You're a joke." He pulled out his phone, instinctively, and began filming. "Look at this. This is going straight to the feed." The dinosaur, that's what we're calling him. The room seemed to shrink around Alex. The casual indifference of the other patrons was replaced by a palpable sense of amusement, a shared slightly cruel fascination with his obsolescence. It was a familiar sensation, this feeling of being observed, analyzed, reduced to a caricature. He finished his coffee in silence, the bitterness a welcome distraction. He needed to escape. He closed his laptop, gathering his things with a deliberate slowness, an unconscious attempt to assert some measure of control over the situation. As he rose to leave, Thorne, fueled by a potent blend of self-importance and malice, approached, snatching Alex's laptop from the table. "Let me show you what innovation looks like," he sneered, snapping the laptop shut with a resounding thud. "Security! Remove him. Vagrancy. Dot." The guards, a pair of burly individuals with an unsettlingly familiar insignia embroidered on their uniforms, the Sterling Consortium, moved to obey, their faces impassive. But before they could fully enforce Thorne's command, a deep voice cut through the escalating tension. "Mr. Sterling," the voice said, smooth and controlled, "perhaps you should consider a different approach." Chairman Silas Sterling, the man who controlled the very fabric of Viridia's wealth and power, stepped forward. He was a figure sculpted from generations of privilege, his presence radiating an authority that demanded immediate deference. He offered Alex a bespoke suit jacket, the fabric impossibly soft, the stitching flawlessly executed. "The stage is yours," Sterling said, his eyes, a startling shade of glacial blue, fixed directly on Thorne. The room fell silent, a wave of disbelief and nascent fear washing over the assembled crowd. Chapter 2. Echoes of Obsidian. The silence in the urban dev innovation gala stretched, thick and suffocating, like the humidity clinging to the high-rise glass. It wasn't a silence born of admiration or intrigued curiosity, but of something colder, sharper, a recognition of something fundamentally out of place. Sebastian, his face a mottled red, stood frozen beside his defeated laptop, the remnants of his swagger completely extinguished. The opulent surroundings, usually buzzing with the frenetic energy of ambitious startups and venture capital sharks, felt suddenly staged. Alex stood calmly, the bespoke suit a stark, almost brutal, contrast to his usual muted attire. The fabric a deep, absorbing obsidian seemed to swallow the light around him, reflecting back nothing but a chilling composure. Chairman Silas Sterling's presence wasn't merely authoritative, it was an imposition, a physical manifestation of centuries of inherited power. He moved with a quiet grace, a deliberate slowness that commanded attention without demanding it. Thorne, the man who'd been so vehemently consumed by his own self-importance, now looked like a cornered animal. He shifted uncomfortably, the action betraying a flicker of panic. His initial sneer had dissolved, replaced by a brittle, strained smile that didn't reach his eyes. Silas Sterling didn't acknowledge the disruption, didn't even seem to register the chaos had unleashed. He simply observed, his glacial blue eyes, impossibly deep and knowing, scrutinizing each face in the room. It was a gaze that seemed to dissect not just appearances, but intentions, motivations, the very essence of a person. "Mr. Sterling." Solace's voice was a low rumble, carefully modulated, yet carrying an undeniable weight. "I believe you'll find that some individuals possess a remarkable ability to see beyond the surface." He gestured subtly towards Alex, and a nearby security guard, one of the Sterling Consortium's enforcers, a man who bore a disconcerting resemblance to a predator, efficiently escorted Alex to the stage. The stage itself was a minimalist masterpiece, polished concrete, subtly illuminated, a single, stark microphone standing at its center. Alex moved with the practiced ease of a man accustomed to operating in the shadows, a ghost amongst the gleaming steel and glass of the city. He didn't rise to a theatrical greeting, didn't attempt to charm or engage. He simply stood, a silent sentinel. "The purpose of this gathering," Alex began, his voice surprisingly resonant, devoid of inflection, "is to foster innovation, to identify potential solutions to the challenges facing Viridia. However," he paused, letting the word hang in the air, "I've observed a troubling trend, a preoccupation with the superficial, with the appearance of progress, rather than with genuine substance." His words, delivered with that unnerving calm, were like a surgical incision, exposing the rot beneath the glossy veneer of the incubator clique and the broader tech industry. He didn't attack Sebastian directly, but his observations were undeniably targeted, a precise critique of their manufactured enthusiasm. He spoke of the relentless pursuit of metrics, the obsession with disruption as a buzzword, the prioritization of short-term gains over long-term impact. He touched upon the ethical compromises that often accompanied the intoxicating allure of wealth and influence, the tendency to exploit vulnerabilities for profit. "Innovation," he concluded, "is not about shouting the loudest. It's about asking the right questions, about understanding the needs of the people whose lives are affected, about accepting that true progress demands patience, humility, and a profound respect for the consequences of one's actions." The room was now utterly silent, every eye fixed on him. The pressure was palpable, a tangible force. He held their gaze, unwavering, his obsidian suit absorbing the scrutiny, amplifying the impression of someone not simply powerful, but profoundly, unsettlingly aware. Then, he moved on. He didn't launch into a detailed plan or a visionary proposition. Instead, he made a single, deceptively simple statement: "I'm looking for someone who understands the value of quiet observation." A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd, a nervous energy sparking amongst the incubator clique. Sebastian, his face contorted with barely controlled rage, desperately tried to regain his footing. But Alex's pronouncements had already begun to unravel the carefully constructed narrative had been peddling. Just as the murmurs threatened to coalesce into a hostile wave, Elara stepped forward. She hadn't moved with the frantic urgency of the others, but with a quiet, deliberate grace. She wore a simple, elegant dress, the muted tones a deliberate counterpoint to the extravagant attire of the assembled elite. Her dark eyes, intelligent and perceptive, met Alex, holding his gaze without a flicker of fear or deference. "I believe," she said, her voice clear and steady, "that a truly innovative solution often arises from recognizing a problem others have overlooked." Silas Sterling nodded, a barely perceptible acknowledgement. He turned his attention to Alex, a flicker of something akin to approval passing across his glacial features. "Mr. Sterling," he said, a subtle inclination of his head, "I believe we have much to discuss." As Alex moved towards him, Silas extended his hand, offering not just an invitation, but a passage, a shift in perspective. And in that brief, unspoken exchange, a silent agreement was forged. A reckoning had begun, and the echoes of Obsidian would reverberate through Viridia's heart. Chapter 3. The Weight of Legacy. The Heir in Silas Sterling's private office was a carefully curated blend of expensive restraint. Mahogany panels absorbed the muted light of the expansive windows overlooking Viridia's sprawling cityscape, a tableau of shimmering steel and glass that Alexandra now fully understood as a carefully constructed illusion. The scent of aged leather and sandalwood permeated the room, a deliberate attempt to evoke a sense of history, and, perhaps, a subtle warning against disruption. Silas Sterling sat behind a vast uncluttered desk, his posture impeccable, his gaze unsettlingly direct. It wasn't arrogance, not precisely, but a honed vigilance, the expression of a man who had spent a lifetime navigating treacherous currents. The conversation began, predictably, with formalities. Silas outlined the parameters of the Viridia Renewal Project, a citywide revitalization initiative designed to modernize the infrastructure and boost the local economy. It was a classic Sterling Consortium play, a veneer of benevolent progress masking a ruthless drive for control and profit. Alexandre listened, absorbing the data, the projected returns, the legal disclaimers. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer opinion, simply observed. A predator studying its prey. "You've been discreet, Mr. Sterling," Silas said, the word discreet laced with a subtle, almost imperceptible judgment. "Operating in the shadows, gathering information. A curious choice for a man of your resources." "I prefer to call it observation," Alexandre replied, his voice a carefully modulated baritone. "The people who build empires rarely see what's truly happening beneath the surface." He paused, letting the statement hang in the air, gauging Silas' reaction. The chairman's expression remained impassive, but a flicker of something, perhaps recognition, perhaps amusement, briefly crossed his eyes. The first hour was a carefully choreographed dance, a test of wills. Silas presented himself as a patron, offering opportunity, implicitly promising influence. Alexandre countered with pointed questions, probing the ethical compromises inherent in the project, examining the potential displacement of existing communities, questioning the motives behind the innovative technologies being proposed. He did so with a calm, almost detached efficiency, revealing a strategic mind far sharper than Sebastian's frantic ambition. Silas didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he revealed a layer of the Sterling Consortium's history, a narrative carefully curated to justify their dominance. He spoke of the necessary sacrifices made to build the city, the inevitable consequences of progress, framing their actions as the pragmatic steps of a responsible leadership. It was a familiar refrain, a justification for unchecked power, and Alexandre found himself momentarily frustrated by its rote delivery. "You've cultivated a reputation for ruthlessness, Mr. Sterling," he said, interrupting Silas' recitation. "A reputation built on silencing dissent and rewarding those who cater to your whims." "Reputations are built on results, Mr. Sterling," Silas countered, his voice now edged with steel. "And the results of the Viridia Renewal Project will speak for themselves." The conversation shifted, becoming less about grand strategy, and more about the practicalities of implementation. Alexandre outlined his vision for the project, a phased approach prioritizing sustainable technologies, community engagement, and genuine needs assessment. He proposed a radical restructuring of the city's planning committee, comprised of independent experts and, crucially, representatives from the affected communities. Silas listened, his expression unreadable. Alexandre sensed a subtle shift in the dynamic. The initial test was over. The power was beginning to flow in his direction. He saw it in the subtle adjustment of Solace's posture, in the slight increase in the intensity of his gaze. "You're proposing a rather idealistic scenario, Mr. Sterling," Silas said, finally breaking the silence. "Idealism rarely survives contact with reality." "Perhaps," Alexandre conceded, "but reality can be shaped, Mr. Sterling. It begins with a willingness to question the existing order." Just then, Elara entered the office, a small, elegant briefcase in hand. The sudden intrusion seemed to momentarily disorient Silas. "Mr. Sterling, I've compiled a preliminary branding strategy for the Viridia Renewal Project," she said, her voice clear and confident. "I've focused on themes of resilience, community, and sustainable growth." Silas glanced at her, a flicker of something akin to surprise crossing his face. He studied her work, a sophisticated presentation of color palettes, topography, and brand messaging with a critical eye. "Interesting," he said, a hint of genuine appreciation in his voice. "You've captured the essence of what we're attempting to achieve. It's refreshing." He turned back to Alexandre. "I believe, Mr. Sterling, that you've assembled a formidable team. I am particularly interested in your creative vision." As Silas spoke, Alexandre observed Elara. He recognized a similar quiet intensity in her eyes, a sharp intellect hidden beneath a surface of unassuming kindness. He saw, not just a talented designer, but a kindred spirit, someone who understood the value of observation, of quiet strength, of challenging the status quo. The unspoken agreement solidified between them. a silent acknowledgement of the shared purpose. Silas leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. "You know, Mr. Sterling," he said, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips, "the shadows have a way of revealing truths, and sometimes the greatest fortunes are found not in what you possess, but in what you can protect." Chapter 4. Echoes in Viridia. The silence in the grand ballroom of the Viridia Center was thick, a tangible thing woven with the hushed murmurs of attendees and the lingering scent of expensive cologne. It had been less than 3 hours since Alexandre Sterling, dressed in the bespoke suit offered by his father, had delivered his calculated dismantling of Sebastian Vance's inflated ambitions. The spectacle had been meticulously orchestrated, a carefully constructed performance designed not for adoration, but for the quiet, inescapable assertion of control. The immediate fallout had been swift and brutal. Sebastian, initially a whirlwind of indignant denials and accusations of harassment, was now a broken man, a shell of the arrogant entrepreneur had cultivated for the social media landscape. The Sterling Consortium, through its discreet channels, had effectively neutered him, erasing his funding, poisoning his reputation, and rendering him a cautionary tale whispered amongst the incubator clique. Alexandre, however, wasn't reveling in the destruction. The reward, as his father had called it, wasn't about retribution, but about strategic repositioning. He was building something beyond mere wealth, something rooted in tangible improvements to the city, using the consortium's vast resources to address the systemic issues Sebastian and his peers had largely ignored. The Viridia Renewal Project, a citywide initiative to revitalize neglected districts and implement sustainable infrastructure, was the cornerstone of this strategy. Elara, seated beside him near the stage, was proving to be the most valuable asset Head discovered. Her presentation, resilience, community, and sustainable growth wasn't simply a branding strategy. It was a thoughtful articulation of the project's core values, grounded in a deep understanding of the city's needs. Silas Thorne, the head of the consortium's investment division, and a man known for his glacial patience and piercing intellect, had been particularly taken with her work. "You've captured the essence of what we're attempting to achieve," Head said, the words carrying a weight of genuine appreciation that surprised Alexandre. "It's refreshing." The observation had triggered a recognition within him, a stark contrast to the calculated performance Head been enacting. Elara wasn't impressed by the title, the wealth, or the power. She was seeing something else entirely: a quiet competence, a genuine empathy, and a dedication to a vision that extended beyond mere profit margins. As Silas continued to engage with her, probing her ideas and offering subtle critiques, Alexandre observed her with a growing sense of fascination. He noticed the way her brow furrowed in concentration, the delicate precision of her hand as she adjusted a slide, the subtle shift in her expression as she defended her work with a quiet, unwavering conviction. He realized Head been so focused on unveiling his power, on demonstrating his control, that Head almost missed the brilliance radiating from this unassuming barista. "You know, Mr. Sterling," Silas had said, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips, "the shadows have a way of revealing truths. And sometimes, the greatest fortunes are found not in what you possess, but in what you can protect." The sentiment resonated deeply. Alexandre understood with a sudden clarity that he wasn't just securing funding for the Viridia Renewal Project, he was safeguarding something far more valuable: a potential partner, a kindred spirit, a future where genuine talent wasn't sacrificed at the altar of ambition. Later, as the gala began to thin, Alexandre and Elara found themselves standing alone by a panoramic window overlooking the city. The lights of Viridia shimmered below, a complex network of ambition, dreams, and, increasingly, hope. "You've been remarkably astute, Elara," Alexandre said, his voice low. "To assess a situation so quickly, to discern genuine talent from manufactured hype, it's often simply a matter of observation, Mr. Sterling. she replied, her gaze fixed on the cityscape. Most people are consumed by the noise, the pronouncements. You're asking the right questions, focusing on the underlying substance. He paused, considering her words. Your initial branding strategy was extraordinary, but I see now that it's just the beginning. The Viridia Renewal Project requires more than just a polished presentation. It demands a fundamental shift in how we approach urban development, a focus on community, on sustainability, on empowering those who have been marginalized. Elara turned to him, a flicker of understanding in her eyes. It's about building a future that serves everyone, not just the wealthy elite. He extended his hand, and she took it, the touch surprisingly firm. Tell me, Elara, what do you envision for Viridia? What truly matters to you in shaping this city? She didn't immediately respond. Instead, she took a deep breath and looked out over the sprawling cityscape once more. I see a city where innovation isn't defined by the size of the investment, but by the impact it has on people's lives. A city where beauty and function coexist, and where every citizen has a voice, a stake in the future. As she spoke, Alexandre realized that he wasn't just building a project, he was cultivating a legacy. And he knew, with a quiet certainty, that Elara, with her sharp intellect, her unwavering integrity, and her remarkable ability to see beyond the surface, would be instrumental in shaping that legacy. The shadows, it seemed, weren't just revealing truths, they were offering opportunities, the chance to build something truly meaningful, something built not on power, but on trust, vision, and the enduring value of human connection. Chapter 5. The Architect of Intent. The humid air of the Viridia Renewal Project's command center hung heavy, with the scent of polished steel and nervous energy. It wasn't the sterile, aggressively modern atmosphere Alexandre expected of a flagship initiative, and he found himself appreciating its raw, almost unfinished quality. This was a space built for collaboration, for the slow, considered distillation of ideas, a direct contradiction to the frantic, ego-driven pace that had characterized Sebastian's rise. Elara was already immersed in a complex holographic projection of the city's grid, a delicate blue network shimmering over the projected skyline. She moved with a practiced grace, her fingers dancing across a custom-built interface, transforming raw data into layered visualizations of traffic flow, energy consumption, and population density. The meticulousness of her work was a stark contrast to the chaotic, almost performative brand of innovation Shed witnessed earlier that evening. Alexandre observed her, a quiet satisfaction settling over him. Had intended this meeting as a formal introduction, a demonstration of the scope of his ambition, but it had quickly morphed into something far more profound. Had come expecting to issue directives, to guide a team towards a predetermined outcome. Instead, he was witnessing the birth of an idea, shaped by a genuine desire to understand the needs of the city and its people. The initial simulations are disappointing, Elara said, her voice measured, devoid of the sharp edge that had occasionally flared during her interactions with Sebastian. She adjusted a parameter, and the holographic grid shifted, revealing a cluster of inefficiencies around the older districts. The current focus on maximizing throughput is creating significant strain on the existing infrastructure. We're prioritizing speed over sustainability, volume over value. He listened intently, absorbing her critique with a calm, analytical gaze. You're suggesting a shift in weighting? Prioritizing resource allocation based on need rather than potential return? Precisely, she confirmed, a subtle smile playing on her lips. We've identified a critical need for increased green spaces in the lower wards. The current plan allocates minimal funding for urban forestry, focusing primarily on integrating solar panels into commercial buildings. While the solar initiative is vital, it's insufficient to address the disproportionate impact of heat islands and the lack of accessible natural areas. The words hung in the air, illuminating the fundamental difference between their approaches. Sebastian had seen opportunity in disruption, in leveraging technology to disrupt established industries. Alexandre saw opportunity in understanding, in acknowledging the pre-existing inequalities and building solutions that address them. Let's delve into the demographic data, he said, rising from his chair. I've commissioned a comprehensive study of the city's socio-economic disparities. It paints a far more nuanced picture than the broad-stroke statistics that often drive these projects. He led her to a bank of monitors displaying detailed maps, color-coded by income level, age group, and access to resources. He pointed out the areas with the highest concentration of elderly residents, the disproportionately low-income families, and the lack of adequate public transportation in the peripheral districts. The Viridia Renewal Project isn't just about updating infrastructure, he continued, his voice gaining quiet intensity. It's about actively mitigating the effects of systemic injustice, about recognizing that progress isn't linear, that it requires a conscious effort to level the playing field. He paused, his gaze fixed on Elara, observing the way her eyes scanned the data, absorbing every detail. Your ability to see beyond the immediate metrics is remarkable, Elara. It's not simply a matter of identifying problems, it's about understanding their root causes. A silence fell between them, punctuated only by the soft hum of the servers. Then, Elara turned to him, her expression thoughtful. You're asking me to build a city, Alexandre, not just a project. To create a framework for a more equitable future. And frankly, that's a daunting task. It is, he conceded, but it's a task worth undertaking. I believe, fundamentally, that the greatest wealth lies not in what you possess, but in what you contribute. The Sterling Consortium spent decades accumulating power, accumulating influence. I intend to use that power differently. To build, not to control. He extended his hand, offering a gesture of quiet solidarity. Elara took it, her fingers interlacing with his, a silent acknowledgement of the shared purpose that had begun to solidify between them. The challenge, of course, she added, her voice laced with a hint of cautious optimism, lies in convincing others to embrace this vision. The entrenched interests, the ingrained assumptions they will resist change with every fiber of their being. Alexandre nodded, a grim understanding flickering in his eyes. Then we will meet their resistance with unwavering conviction, he said, his voice firm. We will demonstrate the value of our approach, not through pronouncements or grand gestures, but through tangible results. And we will surround ourselves with those who share our commitment to a future where progress serves all, not just a select few. He looked at Elara, and for the first time since arriving in the city, Alexandre felt a sense of genuine hope. It wasn't the naive optimism had once possessed, but a grounded, resolute belief in the possibility of transformation, a belief forged not in wealth or power, but in the quiet, unwavering conviction of a woman who saw a future beyond the echoes of the past. Chapter 6. The Architect of Doubt. The immediate aftermath of the gala was a carefully orchestrated chaos. Security, initially stunned into paralysis by the sudden shift in power, now operated with chilling precision, subtly redirecting the flow of conversations and, more effectively, the flow of funds. Within 90 minutes of Alexandre Sterling's pronouncements, Sebastian's incubator, Nova Spark, was effectively deceased. The Sterling Consortium's discreet but overwhelming influence, previously a whisper, became a roaring condemnation. Investors, alerted by a single, impeccably worded email from an anonymous source traceable, undeniably, to the consortium's legal team, pulled their backing, citing a disconcerting display of arrogance and disregard for established ethical standards. The city's media, initially captivated by Sebastian's ambition, swiftly turned its attention to Alexandre's quiet revolution, painting him as a reluctant benefactor, a benevolent force correcting a systemic imbalance. Alexandre, clad in the bespoke suit, moved with a deliberate grace that contradicted his origins. The suit, a charcoal gray crafted by Savile Row's finest, felt strangely unfamiliar, a skin he hadn't earned. He spent the next 48 hours dismantling Nova Spark's operations, Not through aggressive legal action. The consortium's legal team, under the leadership of the sharp-eyed Mr. Davies, preferred strategic attrition, but through the subtly leveraged power of investment, access, and, crucially, the unwavering endorsement of the city's most influential figures. He hadn't sought this power, hadn't craved it, but he recognized its necessity, the sharp edge required to reshape a landscape shaped by generations of ingrained privilege. Elara, meanwhile, worked with a focused intensity, her graphic design skills deployed with a previously unseen urgency. Alexandra's citywide infrastructure project, Nexus, was no longer a vague concept sketched on napkins. It was coalescing into a tangible vision, a network of sustainable transport, smart energy grids, and collaborative community spaces designed to address the city's systemic inequalities. She wasn't simply designing a logo or a branding campaign, she was crafting an ethos, a narrative of accessibility and responsible innovation. Their combined efforts were drawing attention, attracting a cohort of talented individuals, developers, engineers, social scientists, who were drawn not by the promise of wealth, but by the compelling logic of Nexus design and Alexandra's stated commitment. They were, as Head said to Elara, those who believe that progress isn't about conquering, but about collaboration. Yet, the victory felt unsettling, laced with a disconcerting undercurrent of doubt. The resistance, far from being extinguished, seemed to be hardening, taking on a more insidious form. The whispers began to circulate, not of Sebastian's arrogance, but of Alexandre's motivations. Was he simply using the city's problems to justify his immense wealth, consolidating his power under the guise of philanthropy? The old guard, those who had benefited for decades from the status quo, were digging deep, searching for a vulnerability, an exploitable angle. It began with subtle leaks to the financial press, articles questioning the consortium's investment practices, painting Alexandre as a reckless benefactor, prone to impulsive decisions. Then came the targeted campaigns on social media, orchestrated by a shadowy group calling themselves the Sentinels, designed to sow discord and undermine public trust. They amplified skepticism with carefully curated narratives of elitism and detachment, focusing on Alexandre's past, his reclusive lifestyle, and the rumored scale of his inherited fortune. The messages were skillfully crafted, playing on the anxieties of a populace increasingly wary of the wealthy and powerful. The most persistent criticism centered on the outsider narrative. Has not one of us, they argued, as a billionaire playing at being a philanthropist, imposing his will on a community he doesn't understand. The Sentinel's most effective tactic was to subtly paint Elara as a naive accomplice, a loyal subject seduced by Alexandre's wealth and influence. Alexandre, observing these developments with a grim patience, understood that he hadn't simply won a battlehead, entered a protracted war. He and Elara met in the quiet corner of the coffee shop, the familiar scent of roasted beans, a small comfort amidst the rising storm. They're not attacking the idea of Nexus, Elara said, her voice tight with worry. They're attacking Titan. Alexandre took a slow sip of his coffee, his gaze fixed on the rain streaking down the windows. Expectations breed distrust, he said, his voice low. We've created an expectation that a man of my means would be driven by self-interest. We've shattered that expectation. Now, we must demonstrate that our intentions are genuinely aligned with the city's needs. He paused, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Convincing them that we are not simply manipulating the situation for our own gain is, I suspect, the greatest challenge of all. He looked at Elara, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. We will not respond with indignation or accusations. We will respond with action. But we must be prepared for the fact that even the most compelling evidence will not silence the voices of doubt. The battle for perception, Elara, is often the most brutal. The challenge, he realized, wasn't just about building Nexus, but about proving that a man who had chosen to remain hidden, to live a life seemingly divorced from the world he now sought to influence, could be trusted. And that trust, he suspected, was a currency far more precious and far more elusive than any fortune he possessed. Chapter 7. The architecture of doubt. The rain in outside the Sterling gallery had intensified, mirroring the tempest brewing within the opulent space. The silence following Alexandre's address was no longer a stunned disbelief, but a palpable, watchful stillness. Sebastian, pale and visibly shaken, was being escorted out by security, his face a mask of fury and humiliation. The whispers had begun hushed at first, then gaining a venomous momentum about the Sterling paradox, a billionaire who seemingly disavowed wealth, yet possessed the power to dismantle empires. Alexandre, clad in the tailored suit, moved through the crowd with a deliberate, almost unsettling grace. He wasn't basking in the attention, nor did he seem bothered by the scrutiny. Instead, he observed, absorbing the nuances of the room, the hesitant smiles of the assembled investors, the tight-lipped expressions of the established tech giants, the barely concealed curiosity in the eyes of the younger generation. He was less interested in proving himself, and more focused on cataloging the assumptions that defined them. Elara, surprisingly, was the calmest. She had moved to stand beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm as she considered the room, her analytical gaze honed by years of observing the subtle shifts in consumer behavior. "They're parsing the narrative," she said, her voice quiet, almost to herself. "Trying to categorize us. Eccentric billionaire, benevolent disruptor, manipulative tech titan. It's all variations on the same theme, disbelief." "Precisely," Alexandre replied, his tone measured. "We anticipated this. The inherent human resistance to the unexpected. The need to impose order on chaos. They don't want to accept that wealth can be a cloak, that influence can be wielded with a quiet hand." He moved towards the stage, not to address the remaining audience, but to conduct a more intimate assessment. He paused before a holographic projection showcasing the core modules of Nexus, the city's integrated data network, designed not for surveillance or control, but for optimized resource allocation, predictive traffic management, and citizen engagement. "Nexus is not about imposing a solution," he said, his voice amplified subtly by the room's acoustics. "It's about facilitating collaboration, about providing the infrastructure for innovations to flourish." He deliberately highlighted the open-source aspects of the project, showcasing the collaboration already established with universities and smaller startups. "We've intentionally built this with permeable boundaries," he explained, "allowing for external input, encouraging healthy competition, fostering a genuine ecosystem of innovation. It's a fundamental principle, isn't it? Trusting the collective intelligence over centralized authority." A few attendees, particularly those representing established infrastructure firms, shifted uncomfortably. The idea of relinquishing control, even partially, was a foreign concept. Sebastian, meanwhile, was a snarling presence at the edge of the stage, attempting to disrupt the flow with pointed questions directed at the consortium chairman, questions laced with thinly veiled accusations of leverage and hidden agendas. Alexandre ignored him, focusing his attention on a young architect named Liam Carter, a rising star known for his ambitious and occasionally reckless designs. "Mr. Carter," Alexandre addressed him, his voice soft but carrying a steel edge. "I've been reviewing your proposals for the West Side redevelopment. Bold, ambitious, and somewhat chaotic. Nexus provides the framework to channel that ambition, to mitigate the inherent risks, without stifling creativity." He gestured towards the holographic projection, highlighting how Nexus could anticipate potential bottlenecks, optimize material flow, and predict user behavior, essentially anticipating the problems Carter's designs might create. "We aren't trying to dictate your vision, Mr. Carter," Alexandre continued. "We're simply providing the tools to ensure its realization." The exchange was brief, but impactful. Carter, visibly taken aback by the level of detail and foresight, exchanged a hesitant glance with Elara, who offered him a subtle nod of encouragement. As the evening progressed, Alexandre observed a subtle shift in the room's atmosphere. The immediate hostility had diminished, replaced by a cautious curiosity. The investors weren't offering outright rejection, but asking pointed questions, probing his motives, scrutinizing his methods, seeking reassurance that he wasn't simply a wealthy benefactor, indulging in a philanthropic whim. He fielded their inquiries with calm precision, answering each challenge with a carefully calibrated response, weaving a narrative of transparency, collaboration, and genuine concern for the city's future. He didn't reveal the full extent of his resources, nor did he offer grand promises. He offered only a commitment to process, to open dialogue, and, most importantly, to demonstrate that his actions were driven not by ambition, but by a fundamental belief in the power of collective intelligence. As the gallery emptied, Elara stood beside him, her expression thoughtful. "They're not attacking the idea of nexus," she said, her voice laced with a weary understanding. "They're attacking the assumption that we could be genuinely altruistic. The architecture of doubt, Alexandre. It's far more complex than simply building a city." Alexandre nodded, his gaze fixed on the rain-slicked streets below. "Indeed, Elara," he replied, a flicker of something akin to grim determination in his eyes. "We've just begun to lay the foundations." Chapter 8. The Weight of Foundations. The rain hadn't truly stopped, though the initial, frantic downpour had eased to a persistent, insistent drizzle. It clung to the chrome of the city's towers, blurring their edges, mirroring the uneasy uncertainty that hung in the air, even as the urban dev innovation gala began to disperse. Alexandre Sterling, clad in the bespoke suit, felt a profound weariness settle over him, a weight heavier than the tailored fabric. He stood with Elara near the entrance, observing the departing figures, the vultures of venture capital, the eager influencers, and, most noticeably, Sebastian, a shell of his former arrogant self, his face drained of color, his eyes darting around with a hunted look. "They weren't expecting this," Elara said, her voice low, her fingers tracing the intricate pattern of the cobblestones. "They're used to fanfare, to displays of wealth, to the performative generosity of those who claim to care." Alexandre nodded, the echo of her words resonating within him. "Precisely. They operate on the assumption that power necessitates a certain spectacle. That sincerity is a weakness to be exploited." He considered the scene before him, the hesitant inquiries still lingering in the minds of the investors, the lingering distrust. "My strategy wasn't about dismantling their projections. It was about dismantling the itself." The silence stretched, punctuated only by the rhythmic drumming of the rain. "The Sterling Consortium isn't a charity," Alexandre continued, his voice measured. "It is an institution built on calculated influence, on strategic investments, designed to shape the city's trajectory. But the operation of such an institution requires a certain level of discretion, of calculated ambiguity. I've spent decades perfecting the art of being unseen, unheard. Tonight, I simply clarified my intentions." He glanced at Elara, a brief, almost imperceptible acknowledgement of the delicate dance they'd performed. Sebastian's downfall wasn't a result of my actions, but of his own insufferable hubris. He believed he could manipulate the system, play the game with a show of confidence. He failed to comprehend the fundamental nature of influence. It doesn't reside in pronouncements, but in demonstrable results. Elara shifted slightly, her usual composure subtly altered. "You exposed his motivations, Alexandre. But you also offered something far more valuable, a demonstration of genuine competence. They're not used to seeing that kind of quiet, deliberate skill in someone who could have easily dismissed them with a grand gesture." "The initial impact was, of course, designed to shock," Alexandre admitted, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "But the true impact lies in the ripple effect, the questioning, the scrutiny, the recognition that the conventional metrics of success are often profoundly misleading." A sleek black vehicle pulled up beside them, and Marcus Thorne, the consortium's chairman, emerged. Thorne was a man sculpted from granite, his gaze as sharp and unwavering as the city's steel. He offered a curt nod. The investigation is progressing smoothly, Mr. Sterling. Legal teams are already engaged. We've identified several key individuals whose behaviors warrant further examination. Thank you, Chairman, Alexandre replied, his tone polite but devoid of warmth. He knew Thorne was a pragmatist, a man who valued efficiency and control above all else. The goal isn't merely to punish Sebastian, but to establish a framework of accountability, a system that rewards genuine innovation and penalizes manipulative behavior. As Thorne moved to depart, he paused, turning back to Alexandre. You've shown a remarkable understanding of the dynamics at play, Mr. Sterling. It seems the old strategies no longer apply. The rain intensified, a cold, cleansing deluge. Alexandre felt a tightening in his chest, a knot of unease. He knew that this was only the beginning. The seed of doubt had been planted, and it would take considerable effort to nurture it into a lasting harvest. The architecture of doubt, he said, repeating Elara's insightful observation. It's a far more complex structure than simply building a city. He turned to Elara, his gaze intense. We've laid the foundations, Elara. Now, the difficult part begins reinforcing them, strengthening them, ensuring they can withstand the inevitable storms. He reached out and gently took her hand, the touch surprisingly grounding. This isn't about revenge. It's about building something real, a city founded on principles, driven by intellect, and guided by a vision that transcends mere accumulation. He paused, his thumb tracing a slow circle on her palm. And, Elara, I have a feeling that we've just drawn the attention of those who believe they understand the rules better than we do. Let's be prepared for a longer, more complicated game. The rain continued to fall, washing away the remnants of the gala, blurring the lines between the elite and the ignored, between the ambitions of the powerful and the quiet determination of a man hidden in rags. He had revealed himself, not as a billionaire, but as a strategist, a guardian, and perhaps most importantly as a man who understood that true power wasn't about dominance, but about the enduring strength of foundations. Chapter 9. The Cartography of Resistance. The rain hadn't stopped. It was a persistent, gray drizzle, clinging to the slick pavements of the city and mirroring the lingering unease that had settled over Alexandre. The aftermath of the gala was a carefully orchestrated spectacle of damage control, a performance meticulously directed by his father. It was less a celebration of retribution, more a surgical incision designed to cauterize the wound Sebastian had inflicted, and to subtly remind the city and its power structures of the Sterling Consortium's influence. The suit, a charcoal gray woven with a subtle, almost imperceptible thread of silver, felt alien against his skin. It wasn't merely a garment, it was a statement, a carefully constructed tool. He moved through the city with a deliberate grace, a phantom in the opulent bustle, acutely aware of the glances, the whispered conversations, the sudden, focused attention. Sebastian, predictably, was a swirling vortex of denial and manufactured outrage, feeding a steady stream of inflammatory comments to a grateful and increasingly fervent online audience. Alexandre ignored him. His focus was elsewhere. He and Elara had established a quiet, secure command center in a refurbished warehouse overlooking the harbor, a space neither extravagant nor ostentatious, perfectly aligned with Alexandre's aesthetic. The walls were lined with blueprints, complex diagrams, and holographic projections depicting the city's infrastructure, overlaid with data streams detailing energy consumption, traffic patterns, and social demographics. It wasn't a fortress, but it was a strategically positioned observation post, a place to chart the currents of resistance. The analysts are still running simulations, Elara said, her voice low as she adjusted a holographic projection of a proposed urban renewal project for the Docklands. The initial response from the financial institutions has been predictable. They're demanding guarantees, stipulations regarding ethical oversight, insistence on demonstrable social impact. Alexandre nodded, his gaze fixed on the intricate network of data. Let them demand. We have leverage they don't understand. Sebastian's actions have triggered a cascade of ethical concerns within the investment community. The impact investing sector, in particular, is now paying significantly more attention to our proposal than they were before. He paused, taking a slow, measured sip of black coffee. Their fear isn't just of losing money, Elara. It's of being implicated. They've realized that unchecked ambition, devoid of moral compass, ultimately destabilizes the entire system. The intelligence reports were unsettling. Sebastian hadn't simply created a public relations disaster, had ignited a broader conversation. Several prominent figures, previously staunch supporters of the incubator clique, were now publicly questioning the ethical implications of rapid, unregulated development. The city council, usually deferential to the consortium's interests, was exhibiting a surprising degree of scrutiny. "There are whispers," Elara said, her brow furrowed, "about a group of civic activists operating outside official channels. They're calling themselves the cartographers, focused on mapping out vulnerabilities, identifying points of systemic corruption, and proposing alternative solutions." Alexandre considered this, a flicker of something akin to amusement in his eyes. So, a shadow organization dedicated to disrupting the established order. Intriguing. He rose and walked to the window, staring out at the rain-swept harbor. "It appears our little game has attracted a significant number of players. We need to understand their motivations," Elara said, her voice firm, "and their resources. They're clearly adept at gathering information and mobilizing support." "Indeed," Alexandre agreed. "Intelligence is paramount. But we don't need to engage in direct confrontation. We simply need to anticipate their moves, understand their strategies, and most importantly remain one step ahead. The beauty of this operation, Elara, is that we're not fighting a war of attrition. We're building something that be destroyed." He turned back to her, his expression serious. "This isn't about exposing Sebastian's vanity or satisfying a thirst for vengeance. It's about setting a precedent, establishing a standard. We're not just building a city, Elara, we're building a system. A system rooted in responsibility, accountability, and a genuine commitment to the well-being of its citizens." He reached out and gently took her hand, the touch lingering for a moment longer than necessary. The cartographers represent a genuine challenge, a force of organized dissent, but they also represent an opportunity. An opportunity to demonstrate that power, true power, resides not in wealth or influence, but in the collective will of the people. "Let us prepare our maps," he added, a subtle smile playing on his lips. "Let us learn to read the contours of resistance, and together navigate the complex terrain ahead." Chapter 10. The Cartographers. The Heir in the Sterling Consortiums. Private briefing room, a space of polished obsidian and disconcertingly calm lighting, felt thick with calculation. Outside, the rain of that late November evening continued its relentless drumming, a subtle counterpoint to the quiet, precise movements of the assembled operatives. Alexandre Sterling, impeccably dressed in the bespoke suit the chairman had offered, surveyed the room with an unnerving calm. Opposite him, Elara meticulously charted a complex network on a holographic projection, her fingers moving with a practiced grace that belied the intensity in her eyes. "The cartographer's data streams are remarkably consistent," she stated, her voice a low, measured hum. "Their attempts at disruption, the targeted phishing campaigns, the leaks regarding the urban planning proposals, they're not chaotic. They're calculated, methodically orchestrated to sow discord and expose vulnerabilities." Alexandre nodded, his gaze fixed on the holographic map. "Their primary focus remains the city's infrastructure projects. The Westgate redevelopment, the harbor revitalization, the transport grid, these are the arteries through which they intend to bleed the city's resources. It's a classic asymmetric warfare strategy." Beside him, Silas Thorne, The consortium's head of intelligence, a man built like a granite monument, with eyes that seemed to absorb light, offered a grim observation. They're not simply objecting to the projects themselves. They're actively attempting to delay them, to increase costs, to introduce complications. Their goal isn't to stop progress, it's to cripple it, to ensure that every milestone is marred by failure. Precisely, Alexandre agreed, his voice devoid of inflection. Their narrative is one of unchecked development, of prioritizing profit over people. A narrative we intend to dismantle. He gestured towards a smaller, circular display showing a heat map of the city's social media activity. The volume of engagement surrounding their campaigns has decreased slightly since the gala. The initial shock has worn off. However, their underlying sentiment, mistrust, resentment remains remarkably potent. We've identified 5 key nodes within the cartographer's network, Elara announced, adjusting the holographic projection. Each node possesses a distinct skill set and a specific role within the operation. There's Marcus Bellwether, the former urban planner, obsessed with historical preservation and deeply skeptical of modern development. Then there's Olivia Hayes, the investigative journalist, a relentless pursuer of corruption and a powerful voice in the city's press. And of course, the enigmatic figure, known only as the Weaver, the individual responsible for coordinating the dissemination of misinformation and exploiting vulnerabilities in the city's communication infrastructure. A palpable shift in the room's atmosphere signaled the arrival of Damian Vance, the consortium's chief security officer. He moved with the quiet efficiency of a predator, his gaze sweeping across the room, assessing every angle. We've intercepted several encrypted communications originating from a remote server in the Outer Isles, he reported. His tone clipped. The Weaver appears to be operating from a heavily fortified location, utilizing advanced encryption protocols. Reaching this level of security will be challenging. Alexandre steepled his fingers, considering Vance's assessment. Challenging is an acceptable parameter. Elara, I require a detailed analysis of the Weaver's network architecture. Understand their data flows, identify their communication channels, and determine the extent of their reach. We need to know precisely where they are directing their influence. Elara began to manipulate the holographic projection, layering additional data streams onto the existing map. I'm also tracking the cartographer's financial activity. They're not reliant on large, obvious donations. Their funding appears to be channeled through a complex web of shell corporations. Offshore accounts, a classic strategy for a decentralized resistance movement. It's almost as if they us to find them, Silas observed, a flicker of something akin to amusement in his usually impassive eyes. Alexandre paused, his gaze sweeping across the room once more. That, Silas, is precisely the point. They've anticipated our actions, prepared for our response. This isn't a battle for territory, it's a battle for perception. We need to demonstrate that we're not simply reacting to their actions, but proactively shaping the narrative. We need to show them that their resistance is futile. He turned back to Elara, his expression hardening. The cartographers represent a genuine challenge, a force of organized dissent. But they also represent an opportunity. An opportunity to demonstrate that power, true power, resides not in wealth or influence, but in the collective will of the people. We will leverage their own tactics against them. Let us prepare our maps, he added, a subtle smile playing on his lips. Let us learn to read the contours of resistance, and together, navigate the complex terrain ahead. He extended his hand to Elara, and she took it, the brief contact a silent acknowledgement of their shared purpose, a purpose far grander and far more dangerous than a simple act of vengeance. The rain continued to fall, washing over the city, a constant, insistent reminder of the battle yet to come. Chapter 11. The Cartographer's Gambit. The rain hadn't ceased, though its intensity had lessened to a persistent, melancholic drizzle. It clung to the chrome of the city's skyscrapers, a cold, reflective sheen, mirroring the growing unease settling over Alexandre Sterling. The gala, once a gaudy display of manufactured success, now resembled a meticulously constructed stage set, stripped bare of its initial illusion. Sebastian, predictably, was a crumpled figure in a corner, pale and vibrating with a potent cocktail of shame and rage. Security had discreetly escorted him out, leaving behind a trail of expensive cologne and shattered ambitions. Alexandre, however, was already moving, a deliberate, almost unsettling calmness radiating from him. He hadn't lingered on the spectacle of Sebastian's downfall, nor the surprised, fleeting gratitude in the chairman's eyes. Head focused on a different, more intricate game, the subtle shifts in the room, the unspoken anxieties swirling beneath the polished veneer of the elite. Had seen the flicker of recognition in the eyes of a few of the consortium's senior executives, a guarded understanding that their carefully cultivated arrogance had been momentarily punctured. Elara stood beside him, a quiet counterpoint to the chaos. She was impeccably dressed in the bespoke suit, its subtle tailoring a stark contrast to her earlier role. Yet she carried herself with a newfound confidence, the apprehension in her eyes slowly receding. "The immediate damage is contained, I presume?" she asked, her voice low and measured. "For now," Alexandre replied, his gaze fixed on the rain-slicked streets. Sebastian's implosion was merely a single, exquisitely placed domino. The real battle lies in consolidating the fallout, in shaping the narrative beyond the simplistic story of a disgruntled heir reclaiming his inheritance. He paused, turning to her with a subtle intensity. "Silas and the cartographers have provided us with a crucial advantage, an existing, organically formed opposition. We must not extinguish it, but channel it." Silas Thorne, the former intelligence operative who had acted as Alexandre's key strategic advisor, entered the suite they'd commandeered, a surprisingly spacious, minimally furnished office overlooking the city. He was a study in controlled efficiency, his gray eyes sharp, assessing. "The data streams are remarkable," he reported, gesturing to a holographic display shimmering with complex networks. "The cartographer's activity has spiked exponentially since last night. Their digital footprint is remarkably sophisticated, meticulously designed to confound traditional tracking methods." "They anticipated us," Alexandre stated, a flicker of satisfaction in his voice. "That, Silas, is precisely the point. They've anticipated our actions, prepared for our response. This isn't a battle for territory, it's a battle for perception. We need to demonstrate that we're not simply reacting to their actions, but proactively shaping the narrative." He turned back to Elara, his expression hardening. "The cartographers represent a genuine challenge, a force of organized dissent. But they also represent an opportunity. An opportunity to demonstrate that power, true power, resides not in wealth or influence, but in the collective will of the people. We will leverage their own tactics against them." The discussion shifted to the specifics of the cartographers' operations. They were a decentralized network, using encrypted communications, anonymous drop-off points, and a surprising understanding of infrastructure vulnerabilities to disrupt the consortium's control. Their primary goal wasn't to overthrow the organization, that would be a futile, bloody affair, but to expose its corrupt practices, to erode its legitimacy, and to subtly redirect resources towards projects that genuinely benefited the citizens. "They're exploiting the consortium's own vulnerabilities," Silas observed, pointing to a section of the holographic display highlighting a series of digital ghosts moving through the city's power grid. "They're not attempting to shut down the infrastructure, they're subtly altering data streams, creating localized blackouts, feeding misinformation into the city's communication networks." "A delicate dance," Alexandre mused. "A patient unraveling." He turned to Elara, his expression hardening. "We need to understand their methodologies, anticipate their next moves. I want you to establish a dedicated analysis team, focusing on the cartographer's digital activity. Use your skills, Elara. Turn their disruptive tactics against them." He paused, studying her carefully. "We will prepare our maps. Let us learn to read the contours of resistance, and together, navigate the complex terrain ahead." He extended his hand to Elara, and she took it. The brief contact a silent acknowledgement of their shared purpose, a purpose far grander and far more dangerous than a simple act of vengeance. The initial phase, Alexandre continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, would be focused on identifying key cartographer operatives. We need to understand their motivations, their capabilities, and most importantly, their weaknesses. He gestured towards the rain-streaked window. The city is teeming with secrets, Elara, and we are about to become very good at uncovering them. As the rain continued to fall, a chilling thought occurred to him. It's almost as if they asked to find them, Silas observed, a flicker of something akin to amusement in his usually impassive eyes. Alexandre paused, his gaze sweeping across the room once more, taking in the remnants of the gala, the defeated Sebastian, the watchful faces of the consortium executives, and Elara, standing beside him, a quiet strength radiating from her. That, Silas, is precisely the point. They've anticipated our actions, prepared for our response. This isn't a battle for territory, it's a battle for perception. We need to demonstrate that we're not simply reacting to their actions, but proactively shaping the narrative. We need to show them that their resistance is futile. Chapter 12. Echoes of Anticipation. The rain hadn't lessened, it had simply shifted. A gray curtain clinging to the slick cobblestones of the city center, mirroring the deepening unease in Alexandre's gut. The afterglow of the gala, a bruised violet smeared across the opulent facades, felt less like triumph and more like a carefully constructed trap. Silas' observation, delivered with a disconcerting hint of amusement, hung in the air, heavy with implication. They've anticipated our actions, prepared for our response. He turned his attention back to Elara, who was meticulously sketching in a small notebook, her brow furrowed in concentration. The light from the coffee shop, filtered through the rain-streaked window, illuminated the sharp intelligence in her eyes, an intelligence that, until tonight, had been a quiet, almost unnoticed counterpoint to Sebastian's brash displays of wealth. Now, it seemed sharpened, focused, as if she was dissecting the scene with the same methodical precision Alexandre was employing. The irony isn't lost on me, Alexandre said, his voice low, carefully modulating his tone. Sebastian, consumed by the belief that he could seize power through a single, carefully orchestrated pitch, completely missed the fundamental element of this game, their knowledge of us. He tapped a finger against his temple. They've studied our methods, analyzed our vulnerabilities. They've constructed a narrative, not of threat, but of inevitability. Elara didn't look up, merely continued sketching, adding a precise shading to a rendering of the city's network of underground utilities. A narrative of control, she finished, her voice measured. A narrative that assumes we're simply a reactive force, attempting to dismantle their carefully constructed empire. Precisely, Alexandre agreed. But we will demonstrate that assumption is flawed. We won't react. Well, the reaction. He gestured towards the assembled team. Silas, a brooding figure of quiet intensity, and a handful of individuals had identified from the periphery of the consortium, their faces impassive and observant. Our initial task is observation, infiltration. We need to understand the architecture of their anticipation. Who are the key players in this tableau? Not just the obvious targets, but the silent observers, the ones who actively contribute to the narrative. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. Sebastian, as predicted, has become a spectacle. The city is buzzing with the story, the billionaire heir who humiliated himself, the struggling developer who exposed the elite. It's a potent, albeit deliberately simplistic, narrative. We will leverage that narrative, but not to reinforce it. We will dismantle it, piece by piece, exposing the hidden threads of control. The conversation shifted to logistics, the planning of their reconnaissance. Alexandre outlined a phased approach, beginning with discreet observation of the consortium's digital infrastructure, a subtle probing to uncover surveillance protocols, data collection methods, and, crucially, to identify potential cartographer operatives, individuals who, like them, possess the skills and resources to operate beneath the radar. "Silas," Alexandre instructed, his gaze unwavering. "You will focus on the network. Establish a secure channel to monitor their communications, identify patterns, and most importantly, locate individuals exhibiting signs of independent action. Look for those who are not simply reacting to our presence, but actively seeking to anticipate our moves." He turned to Elara. "Your role, as creative director, will be to craft the visual language of our operation. We need to project an image of competence, of calculated precision, while simultaneously sowing seeds of doubt and confusion. Think of it as a disinformation campaign, subtly influencing public perception. We need to make them question the very nature of our resistance." As they discussed establishing a coded communication network, a labyrinth of encrypted channels and anonymous drop points, Alexandre noticed a subtle shift in Elara's demeanor. The quiet focus had intensified, her fingers moving with a breathtaking speed and accuracy across the page. She was not merely sketching, she was analyzing, dissecting the visual landscape of their operation, anticipating potential vulnerabilities. "You're observing something," Alexandre said, his voice laced with a cautious curiosity. Elara finally looked up, her eyes holding a depth of understanding that surprised him. "The lighting," she said quietly, pointing to the shadows cast by the rain-streaked windows. "It's not random. It's deliberately constructed. They're observing us not just with their eyes, but with their cameras, with their sensors. They are actively managing the environment to control our perception." A cold current ran through Alexandre. "They've anticipated our actions, prepared for our response," he repeated, the words now carrying a chilling resonance. "It's not a battle for territory. It's a battle for perception. And they are masters of manipulating that perception." He straightened, his posture becoming more resolute. "Then we will fight them on their own terms. We will fight them in the shadows, where they cannot see us, where they cannot control us. We will reveal the truth, one carefully orchestrated detail at a time." He extended his hand to Elara, the brief contact a silent acknowledgement of their shared purpose, a purpose far grander and far more dangerous than a simple act of vengeance. "Let us prepare our maps. Let us learn to read the contours of resistance, and, together, navigate the complex terrain ahead." Chapter 13. The Cartographers of Discord. The rain hadn't truly ceased, but the oppressive gray of the city seemed to have retreated slightly, replaced by the muted glow of the streetlights reflecting off the slick pavement. Alexandre, still clad in the bespoke suit, felt a layer of something akin to steel beneath his skin. The gala had been a meticulously crafted performance, a brutal demonstration of his control, and now, the aftermath was beginning to solidify. Sebastian's empire, built on vapid ambition and fueled by the city's naive optimism, lay in ruins, a testament to the quiet, devastating power of a man who chose to remain unseen. Elara found him not in the coffee shop, but in a small, soundproofed room, above a forgotten clockmaker's shop. A space had secured with a series of carefully placed, anonymous payments. The room was stark, furnished only with a large table littered with holographic projections, topographical maps of the city overlaid with sensor data, and a bank of monitors displaying real-time feeds from strategically placed cameras. It was a ghost of a workshop, meticulously designed for observation and analysis. She was already there, hunched over a holographic projection of the Urban Dev Innovation Gala, her brow furrowed in concentration. Her usual calm demeanor was replaced by an intense, almost predatory focus. "The light in the main hall wasn't natural, was it?" she said, her voice low, avoiding direct eye contact. "The spectral analysis confirms it a precisely calibrated blend of LED wavelengths designed to induce a state of heightened suggestibility. Subconscious priming, essentially. They were manipulating the atmosphere." Alexandre nodded, moving to stand beside her. "It's not simply about aesthetics, Elara. It's a sophisticated deployment of behavioral psychology. The color spectrum, the subtle shifts in temperature, the carefully curated music, all designed to subtly influence choices, behaviors, opinions. He tapped a holographic point on the map, highlighting a cluster of surveillance cameras positioned strategically around the periphery of the gala. They're not just watching us, they're our perception of reality. Every angle, every reflection, a potential data point. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the rhythmic hum of the monitors. Elara didn't rise to meet his gaze, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface, pulling up schematics of the city's infrastructure, the power grid, the communication networks, the very flow of information. They built layers of redundancy into their surveillance system, Alexandre. Multiple tiers of encryption, redundant servers, constant monitoring. It's remarkably robust. Robust, perhaps, Alexandre conceded, his voice a low rumble, but not impenetrable. We've spent the last 72 hours mapping the system, identifying its vulnerabilities. Their obsession with control has created blind spots, predictable patterns. We're essentially creating a countermap, a cartography of discord. He gestured to the monitors, displaying a complex algorithm running in real time, flagging anomalous sensor readings, unexpected movements, deviations from the predicted flow. This isn't about disrupting their operations. It's about revealing their mechanisms, exposing the architecture of their deception. They anticipated this, Elara stated, her voice barely a whisper. The initial deployment of the cameras, the sensors, the ambient lighting, it was a trap, designed to gauge our reaction, to predict our response. They wanted to see us reveal ourselves. She paused, a subtle shift in her expression, a flicker of something that bordered on apprehension. And we gave them that satisfaction. Alexandre took a slow, deliberate breath. Then we will force them to answer. Their strategy is predicated on control. We will deny them that control. We will operate outside the boundaries of their perception, leveraging the very tools they use against them. We can't engage them on their terms, that's a death sentence. He picked up a small, intricately crafted device, a miniature electromagnetic pulse emitter, and examined it with a critical eye. This isn't about brute force. It's about subtle disruption, a targeted injection of chaos into their systems. Their security protocols are extensive, but based on outdated assumptions, Elara added, pointing to a vulnerability highlighted by the algorithm. They assume a linear attack vector. They expect a single, concentrated effort. We're not a single entity. We are a swarm. He met her gaze, a nascent seriousness in his eyes. We've built something far more valuable than a vengeance plot, Elara. We've built a network, a silent, invisible web woven through the arteries of this city, and we will use it to dismantle the carefully constructed illusion they've created. He extended his hand towards her, offering a simple gesture of solidarity. Let's begin drawing our map, Elara. Let's trace the lines of resistance. The touch of her hand against his felt strangely electric, a silent acknowledgement of the dangerous game they were about to play, a dance between shadows and light, where the ultimate prize wasn't simply victory, but the truth. And the truth, he suspected, was far more terrifying than he or Sebastian could possibly imagine. Chapter 14. The Algorithm of Disruption. The silence following Alexandre's address at the Urban Diev Innovation Gala was a palpable thing, a thick, suffocating blanket woven from stunned disbelief and simmering resentment. The sleek, bespoke suit, a deliberate provocation, seemed to hang on him like a dark secret, a reminder of the monstrous wealth he casually wielded. Sebastian, pale and trembling, was a study in humiliation, his meticulously crafted ambition reduced to ash. The few murmurs that arose were laced with a nervous, almost superstitious, awe. The real action, however, wasn't happening on the stage. It was unfolding in the shadowed corners of the gala, within the sophisticated network Alexandre and Elara had begun to construct. The electromagnetic pulse emitter, a deceptively elegant device no larger than a silver coin, was being expertly manipulated by a small team. A former systems analyst, Alexandre, had quietly recruited from a crumbling government agency, and a young, fiercely intelligent cybersecurity student named Liam, whom Alexandre had discovered scouring the dark web for vulnerability. The initial spike was calibrated precisely, Liam. Alexandre's voice was low, almost a murmur, as he monitored the readings on a small encrypted tablet. Just enough to trigger a cascade of redundant system checks, forcing a temporary halt to their primary network protocols. Liam, his fingers flying across the tablet's interface, didn't look up. The ripple effect is phenomenal, Mr. Sterling. Their security division is scrambling, attempting to isolate the source. It's proving difficult. Difficult isn't impossible, Alexandre countered, a faint, almost predatory smile playing on his lips. Their reliance on brute force security is their fatal flaw. They built a fortress, we're dismantling it with the precision of a surgeon. Elara, meanwhile, was meticulously analyzing the data streaming from the network, her brow furrowed in concentration. She was working with a holographic projection of the city's digital infrastructure, a chaotic web of data streams, server farms, and surveillance cameras. The layered defenses are surprisingly complex, she observed, her voice measured. But the core architecture is built on assumptions about population density, traffic patterns, even the predictable routines of the city's elite. We're exploiting those assumptions like a mathematical equation. And we're not just observing, Elara, Alexandre said, his gaze fixed on the holographic projection. We're influencing? The traffic lights, the automated building controls, the surveillance cameras, they're all now subtly skewed, creating minor, almost imperceptible disruptions. A delayed signal here, a slightly altered routing there, enough to sow confusion and delay their response. The network wasn't about outright destruction. It was about creating an environment of systemic uncertainty, forcing them to expend resources on damage control rather than proactive innovation. It was a delicate dance, a carefully orchestrated symphony of chaos designed to highlight their vulnerabilities. Suddenly, Liam shouted, "Mr. Sterling, they've detected the pulse. They're deploying a counteroffensive, a distributed denial-of-service attack targeting our primary node." Alexandre didn't flinch. "Deploy the countermeasure, Liam." "Dohin." Elara. "Analyze the attack vectors. We're not fighting fire with fire. We're using a different kind of weapon, the weapon of asymmetrical warfare." He gestured to a small concealed compartment in his suit jacket, extracting a slim, metallic device. It resembled a high-end stylus, but its capabilities were far more profound. This isn't just a Stellara. It's an adaptive algorithm. It can rewrite code in real time, bypassing their defenses, creating decoys, and feeding them misinformation. As the attack intensified, flooding his terminal with error messages and frantic alerts, Alexandre watched with an almost detached amusement. He knew he was playing a dangerous game, a game with potentially catastrophic consequences. But he also knew that he had built a team capable of executing his vision, a team fueled by intelligence, determination, and a profound understanding of the vulnerabilities inherent in systems of power. He turned to Elara, her face illuminated by the flickering light of the holographic projection. "The beauty of this operation, Elara, is that it's fundamentally unpredictable. We're not fighting a known enemy, we're fighting an illusion, a carefully constructed narrative. And illusions, as Uwe so eloquently pointed out, are always the most fragile things." He paused, his eyes locking with hers. "We are building something far more profound than a simple act of retribution. We are crafting an alternative reality. One where vision isn't measured by wealth, but by the ability to disrupt, to challenge, to see the world differently. We are creating a space for genuine innovation, a space free from the constraints of corporate greed and the tyranny of the elite." He reached out, taking her hand in his. The electric charge he'd sensed before was now a tangible force, a current of shared purpose. "This," he whispered, his voice laced with quiet intensity, is just the beginning. Chapter 15. The algorithm of echoes. The rain in Viridia had a metallic tang to it, a byproduct of the city's relentless industrial pulse. It hammered against the panoramic windows of Sterling Corps new headquarters, a brutalist structure of polished steel and tempered glass, a stark contrast to the weathered charm of the coffee shop Alex had once inhabited. He sat across from Elara, the muted gray of the executive suite failing to dull the sharp intelligence in her eyes. The air hung thick with the silence of meticulous planning, a silence that felt almost oppressive after the chaotic bursts of the past few months. Sebastian's downfall hadn't been a swift, clean dismantling. It had been a slow, agonizing unraveling, a cascade of leaked emails, disgruntled investors, and a social media storm fueled by a single captured video. Had been a butterfly, briefly mesmerizing, ultimately crushed beneath the weight of his own arrogance and the meticulously crafted countermeasures Alex had unleashed. Had vanished entirely from the Viridian tech scene, leaving behind a trail of broken promises and shattered reputations. The simulations are running at 98.7 accuracy, Liam, Alex, chief strategist, a former cybersecurity specialist from the consortium's own intelligence division, now working as a ghost in the machine, stated, his voice clipped and precise. Liam was a study in controlled intensity, his movements economical, his focus absolute. The algorithm anticipates several key vulnerabilities within the city's infrastructure: the energy grid, the transportation network, the financial system, and has developed countermeasures. We've designated them echoes. Alex observed the holographic projection displaying the city's intricate networks, shimmering pathways of data. It was beautiful, terrifyingly so. Echoes, he mused, the word tasting faintly of strategy and calculated risk. A fitting name. They are reflections, distortions of the original, designed to create disruption without causing irreparable damage. Elara, who had been silently analyzing the projection with an almost unsettling focus, finally broke the silence. The key lies in the amplification, Alexandre. The initial disruptions are merely probes. We need to identify the nodes of influence, the individuals and institutions most susceptible to manipulation, and subtly escalate the pressure. Think of it as an algorithm of echoes, each iteration growing in complexity and impact. The conversation felt less like a strategic briefing and more like a dissection of a complex living system. Alex found himself relying heavily on Elara's insight, her ability to see beyond the cold logic of the data and understand the human element, the motivations, the biases, the vulnerabilities. He realized Head underestimated the power of her design sensibility, her innate understanding of how people reacted to visual stimuli, to branding, to narratives. We've identified several individuals within the Viridian Municipal Council who are receptive to alternative solutions, Liam continued, his voice devoid of inflection. They've been subtly targeted with disinformation campaigns, designed to erode their confidence and sow discord. A pause hung in the air, thick with unspoken implications. Alex felt a familiar tightening in his chest, the residual echo of the intense adrenaline-fueled operations had orchestrated. This wasn't about simple vengeance. It was about something far more profound, a fundamental restructuring of power, a slow, deliberate dismantling of the corrupt elite. The Councilman Peterson case is particularly interesting, Elara said, her fingers tracing a line on the holographic projection. He's a staunch proponent of the Sterling Consortium's infrastructure projects, but his public statements have become increasingly ambivalent. We've created a series of doubtful digital artifacts, fabricated emails, leaked memos to cast shadow on his credibility. We're not just exposing wrongdoing, Alex said, his voice low and deliberate. We're rewriting the rules. We're demonstrating that transparency and accountability aren't merely ideals, they are achievable objectives. Sebastian believed he could buy influence. We're proving that influence can be earned, or, in some cases, strategically dismantled. He noticed a flicker of something in Elara's eyes, not quite fear, but a recognition of the magnitude of what they were undertaking. He reached out, taking her hand. The electric charge had felt before returning, stronger, more assured. "The councilman is a key component of the system's control," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Removing him wouldn't be a victory, it would simply open another avenue for exploitation. Our goal is not to destroy, but to redirect." Alex squeezed her hand gently. "Exactly. We are not seeking to extinguish the flame of innovation. We are simply guiding it, shaping it, ensuring that it burns brightly for the benefit of all, not just a select few." He looked out at the rain-slicked city, a city now subtly, almost imperceptibly, shifting under the influence of their interventions. "This isn't about creating a paradise, Elara. Oh, it's about creating a system that can actually support one." The metallic tang of the rain intensified, a constant reminder of the relentless machinery churning beneath Viridia's surface. And Alex, hidden within the heart of that machinery, knew that the game had truly begun. The echoes were spreading, and he was listening intently to their song.